So when you see this cosmogram, not only is sunrise, noon, sunset, midnight and so forth, spring equinox, summer solstice, autumn equinox, winter solstice and so forth. The balancing points of the day is sunrise and sunset, the evening points, balancing points, and so forth. The balancing points of the year, spring equinox, equal nights and so forth, autumn equinox, equal nights and so forth. We're also talking about the unfolding of our behavior. If we're talking about the unfolding of our behavior, and we're talking about ritual practice, then the unfolding of our behavior has to align with the natural cycles of creation. And we have ascetic disciplines or NTEN disciplines to optimize these different cycles within creation. We talked about, the earth, diet, expansive, fasting, contractive. We have the water element, sexual activity to bring an ancestral spirit back into the world, as well as ritual sexual activity with our spouse, for expanding our energy for healing purposes and defense purposes and so forth, as well as abstinence. Then we have the Mframa ritual movement as well, and then expansive meditation, contractive. The fiery aspect is the exercise, discipline, training the body and so forth, and then the balancing aspect. Now, we want to look at, so we have these 4 different points as we find here, March 20th, spring, sunrise, sprouting, ritual movement. June 21st, summer solstice, noon, full flowering, exercise. And the same thing with the autumn equinox, September 22nd, sunset, seeding, harvest, sexual activity. December 21st, winter solstice, midnight, rooting, diet. But there are also midpoints in between. So the expansive points are the 4 points here, the contractive points are the midpoints in between. And that's critical for this notion of the ascetic discipline. So what are these midpoints? If you look on the calendar, and first and foremost, in the Akan tradition, we have Adinkra symbols. Some are familiar with the Sankofa symbol and so forth, but there are hundreds of Akan Adinkra symbols that carry the energy of specific abosom, and each Adinkra symbol has ebe or proverbs associated with them, sacred wisdom teachings associated with them. There are Adinkra symbols that are also, of course, the root symbols are found in the Medutu of ancient Kemet. Let's pull up this just so you can see. This is the term Sun Sum in Akan means spirit. The term Okra means soul. So the spirit is your spirit body. You have a spirit that animates your physical body. When you transition, your spirit separates from the physical body. Physical body is buried, and you are a Sun Sum, a spirit operating in the spirit realm and so forth with the other ancestresses and ancestors until it's time for you to reincarnate into the womb of one of your descendants, and you're sent back into the world. So you are a spirit, a Sun Sum. Your spirit body is the Sun Sum. Your Okra is the soul, the divine consciousness. That is the divinity in the head region. So this notion of the soul, meaning breath, that's Eurocentric nonsense. In Afro-Akani culture, we have a deity that is assigned to dwell with us throughout the course of our lives. A male divinity if you're female, a male divinity if you're male, a female divinity if you're female, that is assigned to us by the Supreme Being to take up residence in the head region. So just like you have a physical body and you have a smaller physical body or organ, which is the brain that regulates order and tells all the other organs and glands what to do, your spirit body is your Sun Sum, and there's a radiant force in the head region of your spirit body, which in Akan is called the Okra, which is the soul. In Yoruba, it's the Ori Inu, the inner spiritual head. In ancient Kemet, it's the Ka, the soul for males, Kayet for females. In Vodun, it's the Selido, the divinity in the head region, the Vodu in the head region. In Yoruba, the Ori is an Orisha. It's your personal Orisha that's in your head. In Akan, it is your personal Abosom divinity that's in your head. It's called the Kra. In ancient Kemet, the personal Ntoro or personal netter, personal Ntoro to netert, divinity in your head is the Ka or Kad and so forth. So it's like the spirit's brain. You have a physical body and a physical brain. You have a spirit body and a radiant force in the head region of your spirit body. That is your spirit's brain that regulates order in your spirit body. That is the soul, the divine consciousness. This symbol, the fourfold division here, is representative of the Okra, the soul. The Sunsum is the spirit. So you have the diagonal 4 positions here, and then you have the cross 4 positions here, but they're combined in the Ohini Eniwa symbol in Akan. It means the eyes of the king. The king is Ohini Eniwa, means eyes. So the eyes of the king can see all around the circumference of the nation. The king can see all things. So they'll say the eyes of the king. In Akan culture, as well as ancient Khanate Kemet, we say Ohini Ye Oria, the king is the sun. In ancient Kemet, the right eye of Ra is the sun. The right eye of Heru is the sun. So the king's eye is the sun. In Akan, Ohini Eniwa, the eyes of the king, is the solar disk moving all the way around the nation. That goes back to the cosmogram of the solar disk, the yellow sun, the red sun, the white sun, the black sun, and so forth, moving around the entire cycle and so forth. Here you have the 4 points that we just looked at, but then the Sunsum points are the midpoints. The Ohini Eniwa symbol has all 8 points. The 4 points, in fact, let's switch it over. And this is just a golden, in fact, let's just show this real quick. Yeah, Khan, Okragwade, they will wear the soul pendant around their neck and so forth, and there are different variations of the soul pendants and so forth. The Okrakumwade, this is the, image of one of them, but then you have the actual, they'll make them in gold and they will wear them. So these are different variations of that. Now, so these, we just put the same thing. So the different major solar points, equinox, solstice, summer solstice, fall equinox, winter solstice, and so forth. These are the 4 major points, but then you also have the midpoints represented by the spirit. These 4 points represented by the soul. So the soul and spirit united. Even in this particular gold pendant, you have the 4 points representing the soul, and then the 4 cross points representing the spirit and the soul united. In this symbol, it incorporates all of them. In this symbol, if you see faintly, you can see the other 4 midpoints here. How does that relate to the cycle of the year? We know about the spring equinox, summer solstice, autumn equinox, winter solstice. But the 4 points in between, in fact, let's go back real quick. That's the seeding, germination, sprouting, flowering, and then you go back to the original point, the seeding. That's the seeding, which is the autumn equinox, the germination, the winter solstice, everything is going deep down in the darkness, the germination, the roots are going down and so forth. Then the spring equinox, the shoots are breaking through the surface of the soil, and then the full flowering of the summer solstice. So you have that, and then once things are harvested and you consume the food and so forth, then you take the seeds out and plant them once again. So the beginning, the ending is also the beginning. So there's no beginning and no endings. The ending is the beginning and the cycle starts over again. So you have these 4 major points of the year, the 4 major points of the behavioral cycle, but you also have the midpoints. These are the expansive aspects of these, fire, water, earth, and air. But then the contractive aspects are the midpoints. Let's look in the yearly cycle first. Once Christianity came along, they started changing the original, points. Now, when we have in the AKON calendar, ritual calendar, the yearly calendar, 365 days and so forth, 52 weeks plus 1 day, 365 days and so forth. Each season is 13 weeks or 91 days. So from September 22nd to December 21st, 13 weeks, 91 days. But there's a midpoint, which is around, right in the middle after around 42, 43 days and so forth, right in the midpoint, a cycle of a couple of days in the midpoint and so forth. That's why in our Khan culture, every 42 days is a Dadjuya 9, a 40-day cycle, and then the 2 days on each end. So it's 42 days, and then the cycle keeps competing or completing and so forth. So we have 9 cycles of 42 days in our ritual calendar, and it's constantly going on. Every 6th Sunday or every 42 days is an Akan ancestral ritual Awusida or a ritual Sunday and so forth, a Wusiadai. So every 42 days. But then we also have the, seasonal cycle. So you have that equinox and solstice, which is here and here. But then there's a midpoint around that 42 days. Then you have the winter solstice. Then you have a midpoint around 42, 43 days. Then you have the equinox. You have a midpoint here. Solstice, a midpoint here. Because of Christianity, Islam, and all of that, they began to corrupt those midpoints and manufacture other little observances. But they're remnants of what we've always celebrated. We talked about the behavioral cycle, the yearly cycle of seeding and so forth, and the behavioral cycle related to that yearly cycle. When you get to the spring section and the emotions, energy expressions are manifesting on one side, the plants are manifesting and so forth, a child being born in spring and so forth, all these different things related to the emergence and so forth. But then when you get to the midpoint, what took place at the equinox, one of these 4 major points, expansive points, begins to mature and manifest at the midpoint. So those are sacred points as well. You have an expansive pole, and then the midpoint is contractive. An expansive pole, contractive. Expansive pole, contractive, expansive pole, contractive. As shown in this symbol here with all 8 points. If you look at the calendar, you will find that. March 20th is a spring equinox. Halfway through the point between March 20th and June 21st is May 1st. Look on the calendar, it says May Day. What is May Day? If you go back pre-Christianity, it's the celebration of the maypole, which is a fertility festival. It has to do with the fertility, the manifestation of what started on March 20th, what matures at the midpoint and so forth. That fertility aspect is mid-spring. So that's May Day, or the celebration of the maypole, maturing and so forth. Then you have June 21st, the summer solstice, the hottest day of the year and so forth. During the day, that's the noon time and so forth, the full flowering of the plants. And in our ascetic discipline, that's the exercise and so forth. But then the midpoint is around August 2nd. If you look at August 2nd, in the past, that was the quote unquote Day of the Dead, midsummer, the crystallizing function. Let's look at an example. In fact, we're going to jump through that and come back. We're going to come back to that to prove a point. September 22nd, August, autumn equinox, sunset, seeding, harvest. But then November 1st is the midpoint. What do we have in November 1st? They'll say it's All Saints Day of the Catholic Church and so forth. And the next day, All Souls Day and so forth. That is the midpoint, the original sacred midpoint, the maturation midpoint of the September 22nd expansive pole of the autumn equinox of the fall. Then 40 plus days later is the midpoint. That's the sacred point which is right here. And then the 40 plus days later, you're back at December 21st, which is the next, major point in the cycle. Then the midpoint there is February 2nd. That's always been a sacred celebration. But what happens on February 2nd, the midpoint, the Whites and Arrow Spring, if you look on the calendar, it says Groundhog's Day. Now people just say, oh, well, Groundhog's Day, that's just the groundhog shows up and says if there's going to be a longer winter or not. But originally that February 2nd was a sacred midpoint. That is right here. That's that contracted pole. This is the expansive pole. And then you get to March 20th. Then after March 20th, you get to May 1st once again. Now, hold on one second. Question, yes, the Zoom will be available. So every class we have, we're going to save it, upload it, and then we'll send you the link to it. Okay, so that's the midpoint once again, summer solstice. And then when you get to August 2nd, quote unquote, Day of the Dead. Now let's go into a little bit of that so you can understand what's going on with that. If you go Dia de los Muertos and so forth, that the Day of the Dead. Now it's November 1st and 2nd. So they'll have Halloween, All Hallows Eve, and then leading into November 1st, we were just at the Voodoo Contra Fest in New Orleans. That is the Voodoo New Year and so forth, at that sacred midpoint. That's always been that. Then when the Catholic Church takes over, then they start calling it All Saints Day and then All Souls Day and all of that, and the Day of the Dead and so forth. So in actuality, they'll talk about Dia de los Muertos is not 1, but 2 days spent in honor of the dead. This is what they're talking about. When the culture in the U.S., while the culture in the U.S. is to shy away from discussions of death, Mexicans embrace death. They're talking about Mexicans and so forth, but they'll talk about the Aztec Indians for thousands of years. The Day of the Dead was celebrated late July, early August. Late July, early August, around August 2nd, which is that sacred midpoint. By the Aztecs for thousands of years, when the Spaniards conquered Mexico in the 1500s, they looked upon this celebration as a pagan ritual. In an effort to eliminate it, they moved it to the date of All Saints and All Souls Day in November. But originally it was August 2nd at that midpoint. So that's them, but the Mexicans were imitating the original Afro-Kaini people. So if the Day of the Dead, August 1st, August 2nd, amongst the Aztecs, we look at ancient Kemet, and a festival calendar of the ancient Egyptians, ancient Kemet and so forth. This is the circular zodiac of Dendera and so forth. They'll have the Gregorian calendar dates of different, and then the festivals, celebrations, and so forth. The Neter Ntoro of the month is Tahuti, Aket, the season of the inundation of the divinities of Hapi and so forth. The Gregorian calendar dates starting July 19th and so forth. So the month of Tahuti begins, the feast of Tahuti, and a couple of thousand years ago, this is what was going down. What would be today's July 19th is the marriage of Asar and Aset. July 21st, the birthday of the Aten. July 25th, the feast of Aket. And if you look at the different ones, for example, September 22nd or September 21st, the autumn equinox, honors to Het Heru. September 22nd, ritual to the Ntoru, the divinities of the two lands. September 23rd, honors offered to Atem and the divinity Atem, as well as the female divinity Atemet. This is where they get autumn from. September 22nd and 23rd in the Western Hemisphere is the autumn equinox and so forth. So honors offered to Atem or Atum, as well as the female divinity Atemet, which is Asase Nebet Pet and so forth. So you see these different festivals. But when you get to that midpoint, which is August 2nd, around August 2nd, and it can vary August 2nd, 3rd, 4th, around that time, the midpoint between June 21st and September 22nd, August 4th, that's that midpoint area, Festival of the Dead, sunset ceremony. So it's not the Aztecs had the Day of the Dead in late July, early August by the Aztec Indians for thousands of years. The pyramids that were built in ancient America 3,000 plus years ago by our people before the Asians invaded and imitated the pyramid culture and so forth, we were celebrating these midpoints, including the Day of the Dead and ancient Kemet and so forth, around August 2nd. We have all these midpoints, and when you look on the calendar, you'll see all these points, you'll find these different points.